Welcome back. Now 200 delegates from across the continent have gathered at the Stellenbosch Business School for the 7th Biennial Conference of the Africa Academy of Management to discuss pressing issues faced by Africa, including conflict, digitalization and sustainable management. Associate Professor in Strategy and Sustainability from Stellenbosch Business School, Jako Volschenk, is currently at the conference and joins us now with more insight. Thank you so much for your time, Jako. Of course, we've been getting a number of reports and think pieces from different financial institutions saying that we're facing a new economic world order. Now, just tell us on some of the key shifts in the world dynamic that you are focusing on there in that conference, and maybe that make this specific conference different from the other six that you've had.
Thanks, Anati. Well, firstly, this conference, the Africa Academy of Management Conference, is the chapter of the Academy of Management, which is an American unit of academics. But we recognize the importance of having conversations about Africa because the issues that we face in Africa are quite unique. And to your point, this is only the second conference of AFAM after COVID. So we can expect many of the issues that arose during COVID, things like we see today, like the 4-day work week, the emergence of AI, we see things like work-life balance issues, etc. But then also, things that has been with us for a long time, but are driven to a point at the moment, things like climate change and sustainability, things that business should actually play a much more active role in it, and that's my area of study. It's in sustainability. So I'm very much interested in this conference and what is being said by other academics and to create that platform for these conversations, because if academia cannot have these conversations, I don't think business would have them either.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, because business is, or used to be about the bottom line. Is there still that underlying debate of different priorities, maybe profits versus ESG goals at this point?
I don't think it's such a big debate anymore. I think the business world has moved on. We instead of having a shareholder view, I think what we're seeing more and more today is a stakeholder view. If you look at South Africa, the private sector has taken many of the roles of what government used to do in the past. Even private sector in some provinces in South Africa saying, please give us this job that we can do it because we can do it better than government. So I think all over Africa we see governments struggling. And we often see that private sector is uniquely positioned to address many of these issues. And what's required, of course, are structured and governance issues that need to enable companies to do the right thing.
Well, Jako, how responsive are African companies and how adaptive are the business models to these shifts, considering also the legacy industries like mining and manufacturing that are still positive contributors to the economy?
Those are really good questions, and I think that's why conferences such as these are really important, so that we can anticipate the shifts that we are seeing. I think, firstly, to your point of legacy industries like, for instance, coal, tobacco, things that in South Africa and in Africa, the rest of Africa, were big industries, are set to decline in future years. In that instance, I think Africa needs to look at compensation for leaving fossil fuels in the soil. So there are shifts that happen, but we need the skills in Africa to address these things. But it's not just the risk for companies, it's also the huge opportunity that there is. If we look at what's happened in East Africa with M-Pesa, what we've seen happening with microinsurance, I think there are plenty of opportunities for companies for those issues. And there's much more awareness of inequality, of the issues that Africa faces and how companies can address these and actually create competitive advantage, for that matter, from these.
I'm glad you mentioned skills, and I want to ask, is the ground fertile enough for skills development to cater to these transformative forces?
Again, I think it's an absolutely great question. I would like to start by saying, if Africa doesn't believe in itself, who will? It is up to us to believe in our own continent. And, it's sad to see at a university level, even, where we see a brain drain of people leaving Africa for other continents. And I almost wanted to go as far as to say it's a new form of colonization, of extracting intellectual resources from Africa and charging Africa back for just using our own talent. So I think we need to start investing our people, our own resources in the continent. If companies want to see the continent grow, this is the place to make it happen. No one else is going to do it. They're just going to exploit us. So I think, this is why conferences such these are important, that we can share ideas, that we can share resources, that we can upskill ourselves, but also other universities in Africa, because I think the tertiary sector in Africa is hugely important. And we see more and more African universities come to the fore as quality international universities. So I think, the digital transformation that we've seen in the world also is an enabler to democratize education, to make it cheaper, to make it more accessible. But we need to roll out technology, and we need to roll out that opportunity to the rest of Africa as well.
Yeah, I understand that some of the discussions that will be taking place include Africa's role and impact on globalization, but also will there be a magnifying glass on intra-African trade, and also just, the participation level of African companies when it comes to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area?
I think in terms of trade, intercontinental or intracontinental trade rather is still a drop in the ocean compared to what we trade with China, with the US, and with Europe. So I think there is a focus at the conference for that, but I think the bigger focus on the conference is more about responsible management in Africa, and those companies that are doing business in Africa, how are they allowing more growth of business? For African countries, this is the continent where future growth will be. This is where the people will be. This is where the resources are. So it's critically important that we create structures where, if we do increase business, if we do increase trade in Africa, that we do it in a responsible way that's devoid of corruption and the bad influences that business can sometimes have.
And just lastly, to wrap up the conversation, Jako, the African continent is no stranger to conflict and political turmoil. But even now we are, dealing with the spillover effects of the conflicts that we are seeing outside the continent. Talk to us about the impact that business practices have or should have on conflict and peace in Africa.
I think one of the most interesting conversations that I've heard at this conference, and people like Professor Brian Ganson, who's a faculty member of Stellenbosch Business School, for instance, is critically involved in this kind of research. What's counterintuitive is what we see is when companies often just push in philanthropy money into a region, that it actually increases conflict. So there's a conversation needed for exploring ethical and practical measures to curb predatory business practices in Africa, to create structures, to create governance structures, to ensure that human rights and security is maintained. So I think, being aware of those business impacts is a start, and this is why conversations at this conference is so critical, and involving voices from the rest of Africa, because quite often you just see the CSR engines of companies, promoting companies and the work that they do and the money they invest, and there's not enough focus on the disruptive impacts of these kinds of investments.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much for your time and giving us insights on the conversations that are currently happening at the conference. Jako, that was Jako Volschenk, Associate Professor in Strategy and Sustainability from Stellenbosch Business School.